As second parts go, this was a solid showing. Jedi Crash positioned the Jedi in a desperate state with injured members, minimal resources and limited numbers, and just when you think they're in the clear, the Seppies show up on their doorstep and start to create chaos that will inevitably bring about the end of the inhabitants of this world. This one episode delivers on the belief that Ayla had in the previous episode, where you stand up and fight to maintain or secure the peace that you long for, and demonstrates that with great sacrifice comes great reward. I do believe this is a hidden gem of Season 1, as it provides audiences with a thematic answer to the question running through these two episodes, and gives a firm understanding as to what many cultures and communities don't see when it comes to what the Republic sacrificed for the sake of freedom. Before I delve any further, let me break down what transpires and we'll have a natter after. We open on the Lurmen going about their day while Anakin is still recovering, when a large separatist troop transport shows up and lands just beyond the village. Anakin and the gang make their way out of the village so as not to bring any backlash upon them for harbouring Jedi, but this only leaves the village weak as Lock Durd implements a state of protection for the Lurmen.
Oh, how convenient!
We catch up with our heroes hiding in a field while a probe droid discovers them, and it's a race to the finish line to destroy it before it gets a message back to base. Sometime later they wait it out in a giant tree seen in the last episode, where they witness a practice test of a new weapon from the Separatists called the Foliator. A new weapon meant for organic decimation, but it will leave any droids or mechanical devices unharmed. Anakin takes issue with this and feels that they cannot just leave the Lurmen to die when they can do something about it. When dusk falls, they sneak into the Seppi's base and steal a ship and shield generators, and by the morning make it back to the village and explain what's happening. Tewak Kar feels that if they're meant to fall for the sake of this war, then so be it.
You fucking idiot!
Anakin disagrees with this sentiment and tells them that they need to step aside while they do what they do and what they believe in. They build a defensive perimeter around the village using the shields, and Locke discovers their involvement. As they take on waves of droids from a defensive position, they're quickly overwhelmed with Rex and Bly pushed back to fend off the droids getting through the shield into the village. Ahsoka runs back to support the clones while Ayla takes out the stragglers, and Anakin wipes out the defoliator and captures Durd. They leave, promising the peace that the Lurmens wanted to begin with. Kar apologises for his actions earlier, but still questions at what cost will this come down to by the end. It's truly night and day when you compare these two episodes next to each other. As the first one ended rather abruptly in my mind, I did wonder for a brief moment before the next episode played if this was actually going to be a second part to it or not, and to my surprise, it was. Woohoo! I love the themes explored in this episode, and particularly how mature and nuanced this all was, where we truly understand what peace means for many across the galaxy, even just from the perspective of one community and a small assortment of Jedi and clones. For the Lurmen, it meant travelling out of their homeworld and hiding on another. It meant burying themselves in the sand and assuming that this war would pass by them. This is a misguided approach and a belief that will only keep you alive for so long. Even Wag 2 saw this by the end and rallied as many of the villagers together as he could to try and support the Jedi and clones in their efforts by the end. If the Jedi and clones weren't there, they would have just become another senseless, meaningless loss in the galaxy at war, yet Tewak Kar views them with the same disdain as the Seppies, and cannot see a distinction between their actions and motivations until the end. It takes an injured Anakin and Rex, with a worn Ahsoka, Ayla and Bly, to prove that their actions are meant with good intentions, and can literally save lives. By the end of the episode, Yularen comes around to collect them, and they leave the village in peace. They maintain that promise. If this was just left under a separatist regime, they would have likely become enslaved or used for food. It's interesting that people across the galaxy accuse the Jedi of becoming warmongers or inciting much of the violence going forward, when we see them merely as liberators. They never actively make an occupation on worlds, they only act as a shield. If left unmonitored, the Republic would be losing far more than their troops on the field. If the Republican Jedi had responded much later to all this, it would have become insurmountable odds to overcome, and they likely would have failed completely. It's the Jedi's holy moral mission that cemented their involvement in the war to begin with, by virtue of their beliefs as keepers of the peace. I know that this isn't the case in a lot of wars, but the primary enemy here are droids. The result of this conflict is sadly the casualties inflicted around them, and that goes for both sides. I'm not saying that that should be overlooked, but when the Jedi are making active steps to put the fire out, it surprises me how much backlash they receive. We see that it can often at times be more personal hatred, like the Martez sisters possess for Luminara, or likely have a similar feeling from the opposing side who deem the Republic as the oppressors when we look at the Separatist Senate. But from the audience's perspective, particularly following Tales of the Jedi, we've been given a more reasonable response as to why the Jedi aren't strictly the heroes in this. We got to understand some of the narrow-minded views and assumptions that they possess, and how they respond to something like the war, and what this did for the likes of Dooku, Krell, Yaddle, and even Qui-Gon. It became a far more shaky ground to simply look at them as just the heroes in this matter, but you can't deny the good intentions and successful missions that they've endured over the years, especially the losses suffered by the clones. There's a lot of complexities involved with these sort of stories, and I love it when we can have lengthy debates with people over them, so if you have any thoughts regarding this, then please leave them down below. Otherwise, aside from the thematic messaging of this episode and what it strives to explore in such a short space of time, we get an understanding of the discrepancies between Anakin and Ayla's practices of achieving peace. They ultimately align for the common goal of saving the Lurmen by the end, but Anakin doesn't see things as black and white as, say, Ayla or even Ahsoka does right now. The ladies feel that it would be in the best interest to bring the Lurmen under the protection of the Republic, despite Kar's rejections of this sentiment, whereas Anakin feels it's best to leave them in peace, as they truly wanted. But during the argument between Kar and Anakin, Annie mentions that the Lurmen are entitled to follow their beliefs, as are the Jedi. Just because Kar and his tribe won't take arms against the invaders doesn't mean that Anakin and the rest won't. Anakin truly believes in the value of life and demonstrates a depth of maturity that seems lost to the movie counterpart, where he respects their decision to remain loyal to their beliefs, but that shouldn't preclude them from following theirs. They are keepers of the peace as Jedi, and if you think about it, this delivers on that promise as they leave the Lurmen to their sanctity of isolation in the end, and only take arms to defend the community and make sure that they are left out of the picture when it comes to the war. Then the last note worth mentioning, of course, is the defoliator. A weapon designed for organic extinction was a terrifying concept to be imagined in a show like this, but it gives a good insight into what weapons of war are being funded by the Seppies and Dooku at this point, as currently in the timeline right now, the largest addition has been the commando droids. To see the extent of its ability exercised in practice should have been enough to really engage the Lurmen to rise up, but it wasn't until the Jedi and clones were almost run down that Wag 2 stood against his father's beliefs and recognised their importance too. The dynamic camera shots, visual creativity, philosophical debates, and looming threat of one weapon with a small few rising up against it with limited resources collectively made for an enjoyable viewing experience, and I'd seriously recommend you go out your way to watch this one. Anyway, that's all I've got regarding this episode. If you like this review, kick the thumbs up button, slap the subscribe on the arse, and until next time everybody, take care, and may the Force be with you.